You're listening to Landlord Tenant World. Well, it's a landlord tenant world out there, and welcome to it. I'm Doug Shimell with Hapco Philadelphia. I'm going to be your host for the next 30 minutes on this inaugural voyage of our podcast. It's going to explore what we firmly believe is the best industry ever, being a rental and an investment property owner. Now, I don't know if you know this, probably for the folks who are in the Philly area, you know this, and even if you don't, your city probably track stats like this. Almost half of Philadelphia's residents are renters, if you can believe that. And that makes Philly the largest city of landlords and tenants in the country. And it is probably why Hapco Philadelphia is the largest rental owner advocacy group in Philly, and perhaps even in the world. I haven't researched that yet, but we could make up stats like that. It's a podcast. Coming up on this pilot episode of Landlord Tenant World, any landlord and tenant knows that their world can be controlled by politicians. So just how landlord friendly is Philly's new mayor and all the new faces on Philadelphia City Council? We're going to be looking at that with our own legal eagle, Hapco Philadelphia's general counsel, Paul Cohen, is going to be joining us in the second quarter hour. But up first, you see him there on screen. He somehow started out in the classroom as a Philly public school teacher, and he is over the years kind of morphed into a king of affordable housing, and he is the president of Hapco Philadelphia. How you can be king and president, I don't think that's in the Constitution. At any rate, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause and welcome here on the Landlord Tenant World Show to Mr. Greg Wertman. Greg, how are you, man?
Great, Doug. Really nice introduction there. Gee.
Oh, if anything, I oversell everything, Greg,
Good,
as you well know.
Good. Let's just make sure that we also let everyone know I did 36 years in a Philadelphia public school, which probably a lot of people are shaking their heads. But
well, that's funny, and I want to ask you about that in a little bit, because we just profiled our sister organization in the Hapco Philadelphia newsletter, the Diversified Investment Real Estate Group. Matt Wall with Dig, he came from the classroom and said he applies a lot of those classroom things with students to sort of the education of his tenants and education of other rental property owners. But we're going to get into all of that. Did you ever, were you wondering if the day of the Hapco Philadelphia Landlord Tenant World podcast would ever get here?
I had my reservations, but
you had no faith. Oh my God, I'm hurt.
Well, it seems like every time we say we're going to do something, something else comes up, and thank God we got to this point.
Yeah,
I want to thank you.
Well, it's a whole team, and we'll, when we get the Academy Award, we'll bring everybody up on stage. So I've got to ask you, why in God's name would anyone go from being a Philly public school teacher to getting into the affordable rental housing business? Did you make that clean transition, or were you doing one and you were doing the other, and then you just got rid of the classroom?
Initially, the idea was I was married, and my wife and I decided maybe we'll start our own business. And I went back. I got an MBA at St. Joe's in marketing, and was playing tennis with a bunch of the boys. Had them over to the house one night to have a little barbecue, and they were impressed with the deck that I just finished and the kitchen I just finished.
Oh, great. You're so handy.
Room that I just finished, and they're going, we don't know which end of the hammer to hold up. You should really get into our business. And that's exactly what happened. I started looking into it, and we did go look at businesses, but nothing really was sticking with us. So I followed and pursued this I decided, let me go take a look at rental businesses. And I was very lucky because I started in Mania, which was, I kind of almost got in on the ground floor there.
Yeah.
So I think it was
And what year would this have been? What time
52,000,
frame?
1987,
87.
first property, $52,000. 2 blocks from the train station,
Oh, golly.
3 blocks from Main Street.
Main
It
Street.
was like,
Oh,
wow.
man.
Yeah. It just,
Uh,
it needed a lot of help though. So,
yeah.
and
Is that
Brad
a pretty
McCullough.
is that a pretty
Brad,
typical transition though? I mean, to go from, you know, go from a completely different world into, being a rental property owner. And like you
absolutely.
said, a lot of your buddies didn't know which end of the hammer to hold. So I mean, do people all of a sudden go, "Oh, this is sweet, and I could make this work, and these are easy things that I can do"? I mean, what's kind of the selling point?
Well, it was first of all, the big thing is that as I sat down with these guys to discuss the ins and outs, I will say this: the first thing they told me is you got to join this organization because you just don't. There's so many rules and regulations, and there's a one-stop shopping for that. And it was Hapco. Um, and what got me into it, of course, was the fact that you have a passive income source, which is nice. You have a
Yeah,
great tax deduction.
I was going to say
You're,
tax deduction key.
and tenants pay down your upkeep, maintenance, and your mortgage. But the big thing was the appreciation, which um, I turned around and sold that same property in 2000. I want to say 2013 for
Right.
$300,000.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
and I didn't put that much into it. I didn't take it. It was just strictly very affordable. Uh,
yeah. And
I
you're
just kept them clean and nice. That's all.
Yeah, and that's been one of sort of the one part of the mission statement of Hapco Philadelphia. It's clean, safe, affordable, comfortable,
Right.
legal, licensed rental properties, and that's so often where a lot of the bad images of landlords. And if you've noticed in the copy that I've read here, we have made a concerted effort through Greg's direction of basically trying to get rid of the word landlord because it just has such a negative connotation. Greg, rental
Certainly does.
property owners or rental investment property owners are what the majority of members of Hapco Philadelphia and rental property owners are.
Correct. Mom and pops.
Exactly. And one of the great misperceptions, and you and our legal counsel, Paul Cohen, who we'll be talking to here in just a few minutes, we're talking about this. There was an opinion piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the local newspaper, and it was by a tenant advocate, and it spoke of all these hardships that she had faced at the hands of a greedy corporate landlord. And one of the great misperceptions about rental property owners, they were all a bunch of greedy corporate types. And as you had written in the opinion editorial response, that the rental property owners are, as you said, mom and pops. It's small business people with families to feed.
Exactly. One of the things that gets missed on this whole thing is that 74% of all low to moderate income housing in the city of Philadelphia is owned by a mom and pop. Mom and pops are considered anyone who owns anywhere from 1 to 5 units. And in Philadelphia, we unfortunately, prior to the pandemic, we were over 4,000 units short. And after the pandemic, things really started to fall apart. We lost a lot of our people, our members, because they had to get out. Can't go 18 months without any income.
Well, the eviction moratorium was killer for some members who were right on the razor's edge of affordability. And you mentioned that the majority of the Hapco Philadelphia members are mom and pops. They also provide the majority of affordable housing in Philadelphia and probably most other cities around the country. Those mom and pops are the places you can afford to move into.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we didn't have enough before the pandemic, and we lost a lot of of our units after the pandemic. Harvard and Penn have they were great during the pandemic
Yeah.
in releasing information, studies, real factual studies about what was going on in the housing market with as far as what was being reflected through the issues of the pandemic. I mean, it affected everyone, even homeowners who lost their jobs or weren't getting paid. But as far as rental units are concerned, in Philadelphia, the average rental unit sale in Philadelphia, in other words, how many units will go up for sale in a year, is 3.5%. That's been pretty much tracked for the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
In 2020, it jumped to 21%.
That's obscene. That's absolutely obscene. Well,
Right.
between the eviction moratorium, there was some limited emergency rental assistance monies that were funneled from the Fed through Philadelphia, but those ran out in no time. There
Right.
are still rental investments, small mom and pops still owe tens of thousands of dollars. And as you said, some of those guys, they could not afford to keep their properties. And what happens to those nice, small, clean, safe, affordable, legal licensed properties when they sell? They're not being sold to another mom and pop.
No. So 76,000 people, a little over that, applied for rental assistance. And the thing one has to understand is that rental assistance did go to the landlord, but it was also kept the tenants in the unit if and when the landlord got paid through the rental assistance program.
Yeah.
76,000, unfortunately, only 27% of the people that applied for the rental assistance the fourth time, they finally got it right on that fourth try. Let's not forget what happened the first time around, where they said $850 is the maximum rent that you get. Now, Doug, let's go back to when I first started. The second unit I bought in Manayunk had an efficiency, and this was farther up the hill. I was getting $800 in 1989.
Oh, those
and
were
they
the
said,
days.
"Oh, we're going to make the maximum
days,
rent,
my friend."
Right, and they're going to make the maximum rent $850. Well, what was great, what was really sickening, is the fact that people out in Harrisburg are wonderful politicians out there. They're the ones that wrote this, and of course, not many people jumped on it, because not only did you only get 6 months, you then had to keep the tenants in there for free on your dime for another 3 to 6 months. So not many people jumped on that. But the fourth time around, oh God, it's $2,000. You can include your utilities, and you can go up to 18 months. So
and it at least can attempt to bring them whole, or as close as possible.
Exactly.
But there were a lot of folks, and this is where rental property owners took a hit, with tenant advocates. They were claiming that they had every right to stay in their properties during the eviction moratorium. Well, there were lots of, and that once the moratorium was over, there was this wall of evictions that hit the courts, which was not a result of people who were affected by the pandemic. Many of those cases were put on hold by municipal court when the court system shut down. They had already been ruled in favor of the rental property owner, and a lot of those tenants sat in those apartments and used pandemic protections
for over 2 years,
squat in their units.
Right, 2 years. Try 2 years. We had at least 2 landlords that we know that they were in there well over 2 years in their units and never paid. Amazing.
And I know. Well, I've got it. We're coming up here in a few minutes. We're going to have our legal eagle, the general counsel for Hapco Philadelphia, Paul Cohen, jump in and join us about the whole political climate. But Greg, what would you say? Because we've talked about it as being the greatest industry on earth. Why is being a rental property owner still a good investment? Still a good way to supplement your income? Still a good way to kind of create that generational wealth that you can pass down to your kids?
Well, I mean, let's face it, Philadelphia is tough. I would say, let's just take eviction. The eviction in Pennsylvania, normally they take anywhere from 1 to 2 months. That's the average. in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
In Philadelphia right now, unfortunately, we're back up to about 6 months. And that's a challenge. And anybody will tell you, I mean, people from all walks of life, no matter what the socioeconomic group that they're in, they can be evicted. I mean, they could either not pay or whatever. But it more, as we all know, it affects more people who rent to people who are in the affordable housing. And it just makes for a bad taste if one wants to get into it. The other thing is the excessive legislation that is anti-landlord that is being handed down in this city year after year. It costs the landlord money. It costs them time. They want to yell about wow, my rents are going up. Let's just take the taxing structure in this city. I have a building where the taxes have gone up steadily over the last 7 to 8 years, ever since AVI came into existence.
Right.
They jumped from $2,980. I'm up to about $11,000.
Oh, God.
Now, wait. So how do you pass? I mean, you got to pass some of it along. You can't even pass. You can't pass the whole thing along. And my units are pretty nice units, but I mean, you can't do that.
No.
So no matter what it is, I took a hit. The tenants took a hit because, I did raise it. But that's part of the challenge to a landlord in the city of Philadelphia.
Yep.
But if you do your due diligence, you sit down, you join an organization like Hapco, you go on our website, you stay up with everything, you go and look at our 100 and what are we up to? 187 pages of everything you need to know about being a landlord in this city. You do that, and then you bring in the economic factors of making sure that you've done your homework as far as the property is concerned that you're looking at. Yes, you can still make money. It's just harder. It's much harder. And
what about and we had a couple of questions from someone out there in rental property land, Chris McDonald, who said, how much money does it take to get into the business? Very quickly, because I want to get to Paul here. But I mean, do you need to start small and go with what your bank approves and kind of cap it at that, I'm guessing?
Exactly. Definitely have to know how much money you have going in, because that's going to determine the cost of the property that you're going to be able to buy. And that is a key factor. There are some interesting ways that one can get into the market despite not having a whole lot of money. FHA loan, you can go that way and see. But due diligence is the key right now. I remember back when I started, I know some people that got into it, didn't belong to Hapco, didn't care, didn't get licenses. Unfortunately, they're no longer in the business,
in the industry.
They made a lot of dumb mistakes. They had some bad tenants, and one bad tenant can ruin you.
Exactly. Well, and that's the important thing.
That's why being a member of Hapco, being up on things, making sure you're staying with everything that goes on in the city, because if they pass legislation and it affects the landlord, it's not like you get a phone call the next day and say, hey, guess what? You don't get an email. You don't get a letter saying, hey, we just changed this to a law. Just take the lead paint legislation.
And you can find out all of this by going to hapcophiladelphia.com or search Hapco Philadelphia on Facebook. Now, as Greg and I have been talking about here on Landlord Tenant World, brought to you by Hapco Philadelphia, landlords and tenants do not just exist in a vacuum. Politicians, Greg, as you've kind of alluded to, play a bigger and bigger role in the success or failure of rental housing owners. And half the battle is, as a rental owner, is trying to figure out, are these folks, are they looking out for me? Are they looking out for the tenant? Are they fair? And are they looking out for both of us? And are they going to listen to the struggles that rental owners face? Well, joining us here from his law office into the Zoom box He has been someone that we go to. Greg goes to him. The board goes to him. A lot of Hapco members go to him at his legendary Ask the Attorney, which is a free legal advice service for Hapco Philadelphia members. Another reason to join Hapco Philadelphia. He is our nationally renowned general counsel for Hapco Philadelphia, who is literally on the front lines every day. He finds out about stuff at City Hall, Harrisburg, and Congress, and before anybody else finds out about it. And he's been battling all the challenges facing rental property owners. And he is also the host, as I mentioned, of Hapco Philadelphia's very popular Ask the Attorney series. Please give a huge landlord tenant welcome to our general counsel, Mr. Paul Cohen. Paul, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
You were kind of underwhelmed by that intro. Greg really liked his. Damn. All right. Well, that's what the hell. I'll have to step it up, I guess. So I don't know if you were able to hear.
You want to know the funniest thing is that people introduce me all the time and do a lot of speaking engagements and what have you. And people go through my resume. And one of the things that's on there is that when I was 17 years old, I was in the Guinness Book of World Records. And this is what made me think about this, is that people listen to everything I've done and they disregard everything. And all they care about and all they want to talk about is, oh, you were in the Guinness Book of World Records. It doesn't matter that I've been doing this for 40 years and I've done whatever and the things that you mentioned and what have you. Nobody cares about that at all. And that's why I was a little overwhelmed, because you didn't mention that.
What were you in the Guinness Book for? You're burying the lead here, Paul.
See, there you go. That's all you care about.
Oh, I'm gonna.
You don't care about all the other things.
All right.
I had built a penny pyramid way back when. 17 years old. To me, it was no big deal. It wasn't that big a thing that happened, but it's just the fact that you're in the Guinness Book that people actually say, "Oh, wow, he's in the Guinness Book." And you know what? Here's something funny. My kids have it on their shelf.
It still exists?
It's the old book that was there.
Oh,
now they
okay,
stopped, putting it in the book because they didn't want people to hoard pennies anymore.
Yeah. Well, did anybody even bother to attempt to break the penny pyramid record?
Yes, actually, somebody did beat my record.
Oh,
which really annoyed me because I was then going to beat it again, and then they said that they're not going to publish anymore because they want to stop hoarding.
Who knew, Paul?
Yeah,
hoarding pennies. There would be a shortage of penny.
So it wasn't that I was underwhelmed.
All right. I've never heard that story. I've known you for, God, I don't know how many years now. And
there you go.
Golly, you just never know somebody until you put them on a podcast. Wow. So we've been talking about, Greg and I were talking about, why being a rental property owner is still a great business, is, despite all the challenges from City Hall, Harrisburg, Congress. Why has a politician's role, lawmaker's role, keep expanding and they just have that ability to sort of make or break rental property owners?
For some reason, the lawmakers, especially in Philadelphia, believe that they need to keep regulating this industry. So they keep passing more and more regulations, laws, more licenses that landlords have to get before they can be a landlord. It's gotten so difficult to get into the business because there's so many things that you need to know in order to be in this business. And if you don't do everything that you're supposed to do, you can't collect the rent with a lot of these things. And not only that, some of the laws, like the lead paint law,
lead testing,
you don't comply with that law. Not only can't you collect the rent, but the tenant can sue you for all the back rent. And it's kind of crazy too, because the law is so bad that even if you're complying with the law, so you have no lead paint in your property, or the lead paint has been abated, the fact that you haven't given the tenant notice that there's no lead paint, even though there's none, but the fact that you haven't given the tenant notice of that fact means that you can't collect the rent, and whatever rent you've collected, the tenant can get that money back.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
As you and I did a quick interview for the Hapco Philadelphia newsletter, which you can find back issues. They're all being offered free to the general public at hapcophiladelphia.com. And it is true insider information and news you can use for rental, investment property owners, managers, vendors. we were talking about the new mayor, Sherelle Parker, and we've got a record number of kind of rookie or very inexperienced council members at Philadelphia City Hall. And you and I kind of talked about this. What are you going to be doing to sort of assess the level of sort of rental owner friendliness or eneminess of all of these guys?
So we're going to watch for different legislation that's introduced and where that legislation goes, how quickly hearings are held, what happens at those hearings. Will they listen to landlords and landlords' point of view? I'm hopeful that the new mayor and city council will have more of an open mind than in the past. That's yet to be determined. It's too new. City council too new right now to be able to make that determination on what's going to happen. They've only had generally one meeting, I guess, so far.
Yeah, this past
So we'll
Thursday, I believe, right? Yeah.
Excuse
We
me.
just found out who's the housing committee chairperson is, I think.
Yes. Yes. Same as the old committee chairperson.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and how typical is Philly in the sense that I would you grade, Philly City Hall as being very pro-tenant? Because I would imagine most large cities, their local government is very much a pro-tenant and tends to sort of not think of rental property owners as small mom and pop businesses.
Yes, Philadelphia falls into that category of being pro-tenant. I do believe that this city council and this mayor understands the importance of businesses. And let's not lose sight of the fact that being a landlord is being in a business.
Yeah. And they tend not to think of Hapco Philadelphia members as small businesses. They sort of reflexively go back to that stereotype we were talking about off the top of the show that was in that recent op-ed piece from a tenant advocate. Greedy corporate types, and they're not.
Yes. And the reality is that landlords are the biggest supporters and advocates for tenants. And I think that a lot of organizations, tenant organizations that are out there that are just all pro-tenant lose sight of that fact. The tenants are the backbone of the landlord's business. Landlords love tenants. But
there's no landlord without a tenant and vice versa.
Yeah, but they love good tenants. So when we have a bad tenant, there needs to be some mechanism to be able to get that tenant out of the property. And there seems to be a push right now, nationally, as well as statewide and citywide, to help all tenants, no matter how bad they may be. To the point of there's laws that are being introduced and policies that are being proposed to prevent evictions. And I get the fact that you don't want to just evict a tenant if the tenant's a good tenant. But when the tenants are bad tenants, there needs to be some mechanism to be able to evict that tenant from the property, because not only does that tenant hurt the landlord in not paying the rent, but that tenant hurts all the other tenants in the building. If that tenant's causing a problem and the landlord's trying to evict that tenant, keep in mind that tenant might be paying.
Yeah.
The landlord's not evicting the tenant necessarily because the tenant isn't paying. If the landlords are trying to evict the tenant, there's a reason. Yeah. The tenant's obviously doing something wrong.
Police calls for service to the house for either noise or drug sales is something that is a recurring issue. And as a lot of rental owners we've talked to said, when you have a bad tenant, it degrades the quality of life for all of their neighbors in that building, and it degrades the quality of life in that neighborhood. And it affects the rental property owner's ability to maintain a property when there is no revenue coming in off of that property. That's something that gets lost in that debate a lot.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I know we tend to focus on before we hit the end of the show. What if you had to pick the top one or two issues? And I know I asked you this the other week for the newsletter. Top two issues facing rental property owners coming up here in the next year.
The length of time it takes to do an eviction is probably
through the landlord tenant office. Yeah.
So it's the whole process. So it's the length of time it takes to get into court. Then after you get into court, the length of time it takes to actually be able to get the eviction to take place. So yes, a big part of that is the landlord tenant officer, and the delays that are taking place now. I mean, you're talking about 4 to 6 months now from start to finish to do an eviction that used to take 2.5 months.
Yeah.
And mind you, that additional time, most of those tenants aren't paying the rent.
Yeah.
And the landlord's just losing that money.
Yeah.
For a mom and pop landlord like your Hapco landlords, it's devastating for them.
Absolutely. We tend to focus on the seriousness, providing affordable rental housing. A lot of those property owners have dropped out of the market. The property gets sold. It goes to some corporate where they make it market rate, and there's more affordable housing lost to the market. But there are good things that come from being a rental property owner. Almost all of Hapco Philadelphia members have great relationships with their tenants. That's one of the big rewards to being an affordable housing provider.
They do, and that is very important. And it can be, as you mentioned before, it can be a good business.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as long as you can navigate all of these different pitfalls that are out there.
Well, guys, believe it or not, we are out of time for the inaugural edition of Landlord Tenant World. I want to thank both of our guests, Hapco Philadelphia's General Counsel Paul Cohen, who is the host of the very popular Ask the Attorney series online. It's one of those free members benefits to Hapco Philadelphia members. You can check that out by going to hapcophiladelphia.com. Also want to thank our beloved king and president of Hapco Philadelphia, Greg Wertman, for sharing his from class to riches story, but no penny pyramid apparently. And if you are a rental or investment property owner, manager, vendor, and you're not a member of Hapco Philadelphia, you've got to check out the website at hapcophiladelphia.com, or check out Hapco Philadelphia on Facebook. And if you're in the Philly area, come out to one of the free Hapco education sessions. You can learn from the experts. You can come to the annual meeting that's coming up at the Bala Golf Club in April. For more information, go to hapcophiladelphia.com. And we want your questions. This is what we want for future podcasts, future editions of Landlord Tenant World. So post them on our Facebook page or the Facebook membership page, or just email them to me at doug@focusmediaservices.com. doug@focusmediaservices.com. For everybody here at Hapco Philadelphia, I'm Doug Shimell, reminding you it's a landlord tenant world out there. So welcome to it. See you next time, everybody. Thanks for listening to Landlord Tenant World. To learn more, visit Hapco Philadelphia at hapcophiladelphia.com. And we'll see you next time.